Everybody, and welcome to today's webinar which is all about how data and technology combine to help government beat fraudsters. So I said good afternoon from London, but I know we have a global audience today. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are joining us from. I'm Siobhan Bonita. I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government FinTech and its sister publication, Global Government Forum. They serve civil servants all around the world. And I'd also like to thank our knowledge partner today, and that's SAS. So in terms of today's topic, as societies and governments all around the world become more and more digitalized, officials are increasingly turning to technology-led solutions to help prevent fraud and also to catch those who have already committed fraud. So in the UK, for example, the government has developed a tool that's known as Spotlight, which is powered by a range of data from different sources to highlight elements of risk that can inform decision-making and grant-making decisions in particular. It's also enlisted the help of fintech companies to help tackle financial crime more broadly, and it's launched a public sector fraud authority with a remit, amongst other things, to build a new counter-fraud data analytics service to provide advanced data capabilities such as social network analysis. But there is still more that can be done, both in the UK and in other countries. So in today's webinar, we're going to talk about lots of issues, including, for example, how well structured government authorities are to capitalise on the possibilities of data and technology to tackle fraud, and what some of the biggest obstacles might be still when it comes to governments using data and technology to help them fight fraud. We've got a great panel. We've got 3 speakers with us here today. And in a moment, I'm going to invite our speakers to give some opening remarks. But the rest of the webinar is going to be over to you, our audience, to put your questions to our panel members. So somewhere on your device that you're using, you should see a Q&A function. There should be a Q&A button. At any point from now on, please use that Q&A button to send in your questions, and we'll get through as many of those as we can before the end of the webinar. Now, let me introduce our great speakers. So first, we will hear from Colin Gray, who is Principal Consultant at SAS UK. Colin started his career training to be an actuary, and he's a chartered statistician. Since moving to SAS, he's concentrated on the detection and prevention of fraud through the use of analytics across multiple industries, including detection of insider trading on behalf of a regulator, credit and debit card fraud for a high street bank, and fraud at a large telco provider. Then we head over to Germany, where we'll hear from Dr. Markus Player, who is Deputy Director General for Digital Technology and Financial Market Policy at the Federal Ministry of Finance in Germany. Markus's responsibilities include policy development and international engagement relating to anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism and proliferation financing, financial sanctions and digital finance, including payment services and cyber security. And Markus also sits on the board of governors of the German Development Bank for Agribusiness and is a member of the steering group of the World Economic Forum Digital Currency Governance Consortium in Davos. And then last but by no means least, you might notice we were on the website, I think we had down Ana Puente Perez, who is Deputy Director General for Sustainable and Digital Finance at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation in Spain. Unfortunately, Anna has been called away. She's in a very important meeting in Brussels, but we're delighted to say that Laura Diaz-Perez has very kindly agreed to stand in on behalf of Anna today. So I'm delighted that we've got Laura with us. And Laura is from Anna's team. She's the Senior Advisor for Digital and Sustainable Finance at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation in Spain. She's chairing work at the Council on the review of payment services, the Payment Services Directive. She's an expert in anti-fraud payments issues and is involved in the anti-fraud plan, which is led by the National Securities Markets Commission. So thank you so much, Laura, for stepping in at the last minute for today's webinar. Now, without further ado, what I'm going to do, Laura, because I know you've had to come in at the very last minute, so I'm going to actually ask Colin to start, then we'll ask Markus, and then Laura, over to you. So Colin, I'm coming over to you to start our presentations.
Thank you, Siobhan, and welcome everyone from across the world, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Colin Gray and work at SAS Software, a leading AI and analytics company that's been around for nearly 50 years. So we've been part of the many changes that have happened in government and financial world in this period. Now, analytics is often seen as dull, but it's the math that gives us everything from catching fraudsters to detecting tumours and recommending what to watch next on Netflix. SAS delivers value to over 700 government agencies worldwide, including supporting tax compliance in the UK to identifying fraud in the collection of national and regional property taxes in Spain. SAS were also recently awarded second place in the prestigious Chartis Risk Tech 100 with 7 category awards, including wins in 2 first appearance categories of behavioural modelling and AI for banking. An achievement we're very proud of and reflects the recent investments we've made in our platform. As Siobhan said, I started my career as an actuary working for a large insurance company in the United Kingdom. So I understand many of the complexities of the financial markets, though much has changed since I started my career over 30 years ago. Since joining SAS, I've focused on the use of analytics to prevent and detect fraud, both within the public sector and the private sector. And this has covered everything from detecting insider trading at a financial regulator to working on the furlough scheme in the UK. But I'd first like to extend a thank you to all the people on the call today. The work that you do isn't always seen as glamorous or exciting, but finding and preventing those individuals and gangs that steal or abuse our public services are the same people that engage in human and drug trafficking and modern slavery. Where you can disrupt and prosecute these people and organised crime gangs, then you're also protecting vulnerable individuals in society. And for that, I thank you. But let me talk about the key trends today, based on the research by SASE's Government Strategy Department, who drew upon sources from consultants and media sources, such as The Economist, McKinsey & Company, from technology analysts such as Gartner and Forrester, and finally from feedback from our numerous government clients across the globe. The drivers of government trends in 2023 came down to 6 main categories. Firstly, interconnected disruptions and uncertainties. Secondly, climate change. Third, social equity expectations. Fourth, what's been called the silver tsunami and the great resignation. 5, meaningful intelligence for decision making. And 6, everything as a service. As The Economist put it, after 2 years in which the pandemic was the force shaping the immediate future, the main driver now is the war in Ukraine. In the coming months, the world will have to grapple with unpredictability around the conflict's impact on geopolitics and security, the struggle to control inflation, chaos in energy markets, and China's uncertain post-pandemic path. To complicate matters further, all these things are tightly coupled, like an interlocking series of gear wheels. And we've seen in the last week the recent summit in the UK around artificial intelligence hosted by Rishi Sunak. And whilst AI certainly has benefits for government, fraudsters are also quickly adapting to its capabilities too. From better scripting and targeting of victims to interfering and disrupting the democratic process. I feel sure we're only seeing the beginning of how AI will be used by fraudsters in exploiting opportunities and loopholes in the system. In terms of today's theme, governments in the legislative process is often falling behind advancements made in technological and financial markets. The silos of system and data governments set up across departments to rightly protect citizen privacy will often impede the ability to prevent and detect fraud and crime. I was recently talking with a European tax agency that had interpreted GDPR requirements in a restrictive manner that seemed to prevent them from sharing data across departments, let alone bringing in supplementary data with private sector organisations. In the United Kingdom, I think we've tackled some of those issues, and private sector data, for example, account holder data from banks and financial institutions, is routinely provided. At SAS, we're often asked what the next big fraud or scam that organisations need to prepare for and what they can do to mitigate these risks. The scams are going to be changing so fast, and if you're always addressing with what you're dealing with today, you're never looking at what the next scam is going to be. You're never going to be ready to have the appropriate prevention capability in place for the future. First, you need to think about agility in your overall program. How are you creating a data ecosystem that allows you to rapidly integrate with internal and external data sources to leverage all of the innovations in the marketplace? And how do you leverage that data ecosystem in a sustainable fraud prevention program that includes an architecture that allows you to access to analytics and artificial intelligence but with a governance structure that allows you to get consistent production and value out of those investments. So it's less about the scam of the day, and it's more strategic in how you're setting up that ecosystem to address the issues you're facing right now, but also the issues that you're going to be facing next month and next year. Thank you for your time today, and I'll hand back to the chair, Siobhan.
Thank you so much, Colin. I mean, that's a great way to start, because I think you've set out lots of issues that the audience will be familiar with and which we can come back to in our discussions. But I like the way you started with, this might not be glamorous, this work, but it's so, so important. And actually, if you can clamp down on financial fraud, quite often you're also getting to some of that serious organized crime that lies beneath as well. And then really setting out how all of this plays into those big trends, I think, which you can summarize as it's all incredibly turbulent and incredibly uncertain what the future is going to be like for governments and the public sector, and how some of these new technologies like AI are coming at us so fast. They're creating opportunities for the potential for the criminals, but are we fast enough in the public sector in terms of keeping up? And some of the things you set out there, the challenges around sharing data, about being too siloed, and also are we agile enough to focus on today as well as looking ahead to the future? Thank you so much. A really, really great place to start. And I'm sure the audience already, I can see we've got questions coming in. So please do keep those questions coming in. Marcus, I'm coming over to you for the view then from the kind of German government perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Siobhan, for having me. Good afternoon from the German capital of Berlin. I think I would like to explore a little bit about what this webinar is actually about. The title is Following the Money. And this is actually a contrast expression to the traditional way how we follow crime. The traditional way is the police goes on the street, they examine witnesses, and they collect evidence, right? The modern way of following crime and fraud and money laundering and others, financial crime, is indeed following the money, which means you don't jump at the actual criminal act like fraud or truck trafficking or human trafficking or whatever, but you start with the money trace. You look at the money trace and then you follow the money back to the actual criminal act and into the networks of organized crime and other criminal networks. And you have to think about crime as a kind of puzzle, and you need to bring together all the data points to get the right picture. And that leads me to the actual title, which is how can data and technology combine? Combine is in a very important term here, because I think in the end, it is important to have as much data as possible, because you need the data to get the puzzle done. And you need, of course, high quality of data, data you can really rely on, and you need the accessibility of data. I would like to make one reservation here when I look at the title, when it says to help government beat fraudsters, because I think if you look at where the money actually flows, it's not the government. It always flows through banks, it flows through payment service providers. And for that reason, the government needs to work together with the private sector. So what is very important for a successful and effective detection of fraud and money laundering is a collaboration, a private-public partnership between the government and the so-called obliged entities, which is banks, insurances, all the private entities where money flows through and which actually sees the criminal financial flows. And this brings a lot of data together. So I advocate a lot for also private to private information sharing and public to private information sharing. And here comes something in which Colin already mentioned, and that is the problem of data protection. So we have a kind of tension between data protection on the one side and data sharing on the other side. And here I think technology comes in and can help us a lot, because we have quite modern technology that on the one side makes detection more effective, and on the other side helps us to protect the privacy of the data. For example, by data custodians. So you choose a third one where you share all your data. You yourself, you don't look into the private data. It's the custodians who does the work, and to the custodian who runs the software that monitors the transactions. Or there is this idea or this software of a migrating algorithm. So you don't actually share the data, but the algorithm jumps from one entity to another entity to another entity. And if it finds connections, then it makes an alert, and you can look into the actual data and combine it again to find out who is behind that. And of course, the third technology which is relevant here is encryption technology, which means you not really see the private data. Only if there is an alert, then you can open and find out who is the actual person behind that and follow the trace of the money back to the criminal networks. So maybe talking very quickly about Germany. The German government, of course, is split into a political level. Where I work, we are actually not the ones who are operative. We are doing the regulation and the policy in that regard. But it's the law enforcement agencies, it's the financial intelligence units, it's the supervisors who use analytical tools. And here in a federal system, you have the federal authorities, agencies, you have regional agencies. And of course, they already work with fintechs to detect illicit financial flows. So for example, in the blockchain area, we all know there is, for example, chain analysis, there is TVM, which are used to find fraudulent transactions in the blockchain. What is, of course, very important is that these agencies have access to a lot of databases, like beneficial ownership registries, to find out who is actually behind a company, which I think is the Company House in the UK. We currently also built up a real estate registry, so that you also find out not only about companies who own real estate, but also about natural persons who own real estates and how they are interconnected. Of course, you need access to police databases. And what is at least right for Germany is that all these law enforcement agencies also have access to bank account information. And in Europe, we currently try to build up a network so that you can access the bank account information from Germany, for example, in a Spanish bank, to find out about someone who left a trace in, for example, a suspicious transaction report. And perhaps to close up, I would like to share with you that we are building a new federal agency on financial crime in Germany, where we bring together under one roof the analytical people of what we call financial intelligence unit. We bring together the criminal investigation, so what is actually police work, and supervision. Because these are usually silos in a government. Everyone works in their world, in their bubble, but we want them to work, to collaborate much better together, and also to combine the data and the technology to be more effective in the fight against financial crime. So with this, I would give the floor back to you, Shiva.
Marcus, thank you so much. Again, really interesting. I think echoing some of what Colin said there about, I love the way you explained the title, kind of follow the money and where that comes from, but echoing, I think, what Colin said about actually that's the new way of following crime. You actually trace back through the money, and you get behind that sits all of the kind of serious organized crime behind that, but also stressing those points around the importance of data and getting as much data as possible connected so that you can see the bigger picture and see where the patterns are emerging. That's stressing there the collaboration then between government and the private sector and other sectors and how they need to be sharing that data. Really important, the point you made, because I think the audience will definitely have questions on this, that tension between data protection and data sharing, because often in these webinars, one of the questions that civil servants have is, well, how much data are we able to share? What can we share within the laws that we operate in? And then I really like what you said there as well about the need to work across borders, across international borders, as well as across those sectoral borders. And interesting in the governance, which might be different in different countries, you're saying kind of from the finance ministry where you sit in Germany, you're very much in the regulatory space, and actually it's the law enforcement agencies that are doing the kind of operative work, but then that new agency coming in to pull all of that together. Thanks so much, Marcus, giving us a great snapshot of what's going on in Germany. Laura, I hope you've managed to catch your breath, so we're coming over to you now in Spain.
Yes, I hope you can hear me well. So thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here with all of you. As mentioned before, I'm replacing Ana Puentes that unfortunately cannot attend. So I will give you my perspective from our regulation side. So we work in the public treasury, and we do all the financial regulation regarding payments. So I'm currently chairing the PSD2. The review of PSD3 and PSD2, and it has a lot of component on fraud. So the first message I would like to share with you is that it is a key national priority. Fraud, I think, not only a national priority, but for all Europe. And interestingly enough, when we were doing the first meeting under the PSD2 review, we asked all members of the council what the priorities on the whole directive would be. And for unanimity, fraud was the subject, no? Because indeed, when it comes in the payments sphere, with the increasing digitalization, of course, new ways of fraud arise, and this leads to a lack of trust. And a lack of trust in the system, in the end, is a big risk on the whole financial system. So this is why this is key, and the directive addresses fraud from all the perspectives, from the authorization perspective. So when a payment institution applies for authorization, there are additional requirements leading to prevent fraud. So already at the authorization stage, but also, as some of you already mentioned, on an increased cooperation basis. I completely agree with some of the opponents that mentioned we cannot tackle a specific service or product. We cannot say crypto assets is fraudulent, because there are so many increasing business models, we cannot keep the pace. It is impossible. So we need to focus on three things: on detection, cooperation, and awareness. I think these are the three key elements. Without cooperation, it is impossible to keep pace with the increasing new forms of fraud. Detection, as mentioned already, from a cooperation perspective, we need to cooperate between member states, NCAs, and the private sector. It is impossible otherwise to go on this. How? With data sharing. Of course, this brings the question on the GDPR, on how data protection, here, how we can ensure data protection and at the same time opening up information. But without information, it is not possible to further detect cases of fraud. And on the other hand, the key point is the awareness, because it has also a very important inclusion element. We need to understand that not all people, individuals, have access to financial information, and they are the more vulnerable targets to these new types of fraud. And I think this element of financial inclusion that needs to come again from the public sector, but also from the payment service providers, from the banks, and from it is indeed key. So when we go more into the detail of because I understand this at the opening remarks, but when we go more into the detail, we can explain our national plan, how it tackles these aspects, and also from the review of the PSD, how these aspects actually land, and how we can further elaborate on that, or any questions that you may want to take in this respect. But again, cooperation is key, financial awareness is key, and we need to detect rather than target a specific type of fraud. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Laura. I mean, great there that you've brought in some new aspects, because I think we've been talking about government identifying some of that serious organized crime, that affects kind of governments itself. But you're also bringing in that aspect of vulnerable citizens can actually be the most, targeted the most by fraudsters, get hit hardest by some of these financial scams that are out there. So what's government's role in kind of making them aware of what's going on? How do we educate people in some of this? And how do we help to keep our citizens safe from some of these new things? And again, you're echoing what we've heard before, this, which was going to be one of my first questions, actually. How do we as public sector keep pace with the new technologies that fraudsters themselves, that criminals themselves are going to be using for some of this activity? And then going back to what Colin was said, the importance of detection in the first place. How do you use all of those data sources to identify the patterns where some of this might be happening? So a lot there going on in Spain as well. And you similarly saying what Marcus is saying, the importance of working across countries. So, for example, in the EU, but more broadly, I guess, internationally, how can we all be working across boundaries in the public sector? Thank you so much to all of them, to all of you for those opening comments. We do have questions coming in. I want to kind of kick off, I guess, just with one of my own very quickly, coming back on that then, which is, you have mentioned the kind of challenge there of keeping pace with criminal activity. But Colin, you mentioned AI at the beginning and the AI summit. So technology is moving so rapidly and it's getting ever more sophisticated. With the limited resources that we have in the public sector and in governments, can we really hope to keep ahead of the criminals in terms of what do we need in terms of kind of skilling up civil servants or working maybe with private sector partners so that we're ahead of what the criminals are likely to do? And Colin, I'll come back to you because we haven't heard from you for a while.
Sure. Thank you. And there probably isn't a single answer to this. I think it comes down to kind of one of my earlier comments about being agile. Fraudsters are much more agile than government. They don't have the same rules that we have in government. So if they want to do something, they just go ahead and do it. They don't need to go through 5 committee meetings to agree it. So they're much more able to commit fraud, and in a sense, governments and private sector are responding to those types of fraud. So it comes down to having an ability to see the fraud quickly and respond to it quickly, I would say. I think the other issue is that if you're good at fraud, you don't get found out. So, I kind of see 2 types of fraud. There's the kind of self-revealing fraud, which is a bit like if somebody steals money from your bank account, it's happened and you can understand it. But if somebody steals, let's say in the construction industry, or puts the price up of something in the construction industry, you just end up paying more for it. You don't necessarily know that you've been fraudulent. And that may continue for many years without ever being found out. And so I think as governments, we need to focus on both that self-revealing fraud that's obvious, but equally on the non-revealing fraud as well, the fraud that's kind of endemic in our systems that never comes to light. And if you look at the estimates of fraud, certainly in the UK, they vary from, anything from kind of 20 billion or so to over 100 billion. So there's not a really good estimate on the levels of fraud within government, let alone private sector. And as you said, it is about helping the more vulnerable members of society, because they're the least able to cope with the crises that it generates, are much more susceptible to having fraud committed against them. So those are the kind of points I would make about it.
Thanks, Colin. Marcus, your thoughts on this, kind of how possible is it for government to keep ahead of the criminals when things are moving so fast?
Yeah, I agree with Colin. It's a different grade or degree of agility. That is definitely true, but I think there is no alternative. We have to keep pace, and for me, it's always a matter of priority. You didn't mention in your introduction, in my former life, I was the president of the FATF, which is the international organization to follow money laundering, and I dealt with roughly 200 countries And what struck me always, and I give you an example, is each of these countries has a financial intelligence unit. And if you take all the 200 financial intelligence units together, we still spend less money than one international bank spends on compliance, which shows that I think we don't really prioritize sufficiently the issue of anti-fraud and anti-money laundering. It needs to be prioritized higher. And the problem is, I think that especially money laundering, it's something that is still looked at. Money does not stink, right? And that is something where we have to change the awareness of this. So I think we need more resources for that fight. We also need excellent experts who work for the government in that area. Of course, they cost money, but I think the government can always attract them with the good purpose that we do in the law enforcement agencies. And then what is also very important is that we run exercises, right? We need to train our people by imitating an attack on our system, and so that we are ready when it's becoming real.
Thanks, Marcus. So you've mentioned some of the challenges, I think, in terms of kind of skilling up existing civil servants, but also maybe recruiting in people with the right skills, and how do you make that attractive to come into the public sector and stay in the public sector as well. So some really big challenges there. And then maybe, as you say, changing the culture around this and getting people to understand why it's so important. Laura, your thoughts on Can We Get Ahead? And actually Ian Hall, who is the editor of Global Government FinTech, he's kind of put in the same question but phrased it slightly differently, which is technology is helping governments and law enforcement agencies, but technology is also helping criminals. So who is winning? Which is kind of a different way, I think, of putting the same question. Who's winning in this fight?
I mean, it is a good question because indeed, so if I understood correctly, what you mean, can you rephrase that regulation is helping criminals? Did you say this? Regulation? Can you please, because you are silent, you're on mute.
Yeah, technology is helping criminals and technology is also helping government. So who's winning in this battle?
I mean, I think innovation is winning, but we need, so it is helping, let's say, governments and everyone, but we need to take into account the challenges. We don't think it's helping criminals. We just need to take the new situation and go for it. So we have new challenges, indeed. This doesn't mean that they are winning. It's just that we need to adapt. How do we adapt? Going further in cooperation. We cannot cooperate just in one sector. We need to go, as mentioned before, very wide. So it's not about who is winning, it's how we address that challenge, which indeed is huge, because the multiplication of the effects of innovation is great, but the multiplication of fraud also is great. So it is, let's say, a race on who wins. So I wouldn't take it as who wins, but how do we address this risk? Now, how do we address this risk is going back to what I mentioned before. The keys are cooperation, detection, and awareness. And to put an example on cooperation, we did a national plan in Spain where not only the ministry participated, but also the National Security Markets Commission, the Attorney General, the Secretary of State of Defense, the Spanish military policy, the Mossos Esquadra, Echanza, etc., the autonomous community, the guarantee fund. Just to put in context the need of cooperation, how wide it may be. Now, thanks to this, there is a real database where all of those that have signed this national plan can access. And what we are working on is how to alert automatically investors when they, for example, transfer money to a fraudulent entity that has been detected by the National Markets Commission. So we think it is a very important initiative because it already detects the investor real time. And this databases shares information on real time. And we think this is essential because, as mentioned before, we cannot go against a specific type of fraud. And the multiplication of business models, since if we compare PSD, so the beginning of PSD already in 2005, with a review of 2007, sorry, with a review of PSD2 in 2015, the multiplication of business models is enormous. There's even a question, an open question on the regulatory perimeter, because many business models are not sure to face the same risks. So it's very difficult to put the line because it seems the same, but it's not the same. So things that may seem very different actually have the same risks, and they fall out of the perimeter of regulation. And this is very dangerous. So of course, regulation helps to address that, but at the same time, you need to very closely delimit this perimeter of regulation. This is essential, and to keep the balance on proportionality, and at the same time how to attain fraud. And yes, and as mentioned before, financial awareness. Financial awareness is the other key element.
Thanks, Laura. That kind of leads on, I think, to the first question that came in from the audience, which was from Retha, who said, is there technology that tracks government funding and the type of social issues that are addressed? And I think I'm going to phrase that a little bit because, Colin, it goes back. I know you say you work with HMRC, for example, in the UK. So is there a way, because one type of fraud is people applying for grants, for example, that they're not entitled to, or money being dispersed from government, but then it's not used for what it's supposed to be used for? And is there technology being used by governments to address that, to kind of monitor that type of funding to make sure that fraudulent activity is not going on?
I mean, in terms of, it probably would be seen as too intrusive. So there was a time when if you applied for benefits, you got vouchers, and then there was an illegal trade in vouchers, and obviously the people then didn't get the full money that they were entitled to. So if you got £100 in vouchers, you might have to sell that for £80 to somebody else. So, you could put things in place, but you might end up defeating the purpose of it. And the kind of examples I would say would be difficult to put in place. I think for more large scale projects, absolutely, yeah. So if you take some of the major government spends, not at the social benefit level, then yes, there will be National Audit Office, for example, will go in and check spending on different projects and things like that to ensure the money is being accurately spent. I think the other part of the question was around social benefits.
Yeah.
That comes down to a lot to policy. So when the contracts are issued, they might be what social benefits will you engage with in delivering your project. Now, whether there's a follow-up to see whether those social benefits achieved, I think that's probably a different question, and it might not be as well covered as it perhaps should be.
Yeah, I think that's a whole nother webinar probably on that issue. Marcus, there's a question that's come in specifically, I think, for you, but I will, or based on something you said. So again, it's from Ian, and he has said, Marcus mentioned the growing prominence of blockchain. Which applications of blockchain do the panel believe will be most impactful or successful in tackling fraud? So Marcus, I'm coming to you first on that one.
Yeah, Siobhan, if you allow, I would like, how do you say in English, kill two birds with one stone? There is a next question, which is on cryptocurrencies are growing in popularity. Yep. To what extent do cryptocurrencies help criminals evade detection? Authorities have should focus on this. I would like to answer maybe both questions together. Let me start by saying, and I recently talked to the CEO of Chainalysis, which is one company that helps the law enforcement in detecting illicit financial flows in the blockchain. And he made clear that blockchain is actually a very transparent and open room. Everyone sees what happens, which transactions are done. The problem is you have an anonymity. You don't know who is behind the key number, which natural person is actually acting. And here comes in the Financial Action Task Force, which is the first international organization in 2019, issued standards which all countries in the world have committed to implement, and that is to break up this anonymity, which is the very famous so-called travel rule, which now requires from all governments to oblige their crypto service providers to find out, to identify who is actually the key account holder of a blockchain number. So breaking up this anonymity, I think, is the key in finding and in preventing fraud over blockchain. That is, I think, the very important issue. And what we currently see is that some countries are front running in implementing this. The European Union just, as you know, is issuing a anti-money laundering legislative package, and one part is the implementation of this travel rule. But we see other jurisdictions who are not so ambitious in implementing this. And we see some of the crypto service providers who now move from those ambitious countries to the less ambitious countries because they want to misuse these regimes which are not that compliant with the new standard.
Thanks, Mark. And that just shows like that in this global environment we're in, people can move around very easily, can't they, and shift their criminal activity from one place to another. Laura, your thoughts on these two questions? So kind of how successful, which type of blockchain do you think might be most successful? Do you echo what Marcus was saying there about the anonymity issue? And also, I think Ian's point was, is crypto, the rise of cryptocurrencies giving criminals more spaces in which to operate?
Sorry, can you hear me well? Yeah, as mentioned before, I don't think it is an issue on blockchain or on crypto. It's again how you address it, because at least from the ministry, how we tackle it, we can see a specific business model, a specific service, but there will be the rise of other services. So we don't think the issue is crypto. The issue, of course, when we study a specific service, crypto, we can send, for example, some authorities like the EBA, they send an awareness to consumers on the use of crypto, which we think this is a very good instrument. The same appears with blockchain. I think blockchain is very experimental yet. We don't think it's in such a development stage that I could give a precise answer in this. There are a lot of sandboxing cases in the area of blockchain, but blockchain has a lot of added value in many spheres. I mean, in the public sector, in the private sector, and it has a lot of potential. So again, what we need to do is let's see how we address those potential additional risks that this technology has. But I don't think there's a clear answer.
So essentially what you're saying is this is never going to stop. If it's not crypto, there's going to be something else. So you're going to have to be agile and be able to adapt to whatever's coming next.
Exactly, and I don't think we should undermine the positive effects and the huge potential that all of these technologies have in all the spheres, and that redone to all of us because of fraud. Of course, fraud. This is why fraud is in the mirror and a top priority. When you look at all the directives, I mean, the first objective is fraud. And it has to be as a priority, national, European, and worldwide. I mean, I think this is a must, but not whether a technology should be stopped because of fraud. This is how I would look at it.
Thanks, sir. Colin, did you want to add anything before we move on?
I was just adding maybe a slightly different view. Criminals want to buy stuff. They want to spend money on cars and vehicles and houses and all the rest of it. And I think blockchain in the kind of whole supply chain from, we saw a few years ago in the UK problems around meat supply with horse meat getting into the meat supply. Now, blockchain can be used for a whole range of things, not just financial transactions, but everything from timber imports to meat and so on, but also property, cars, values. So you could start to track more of that how's the money being used? Where's the money being used? So following the money into wherever it ends up, because I think that would start to close off the whole process and say, okay, we understand that this money came in here, but it then bought a house in London for £2 million or whatever it happens to be. And maybe there's an opportunity to kind of bring both the financial side and the non-financial side together.
So again, you're coming back to that importance of following the money, but also having that overview with all of the data available so people can spot all of those kind of emerging patterns. We've got a question in from Glenn, and Glenn has said, given the disparity between the funding of public anti-fraud measures and the private sector, what incentives could be offered to entice the private organisations to cooperate? And actually, it's very similar to a question from Mike, which is the next question, which is, you've all mentioned the need for closer working with the private sector. Are you in the public sector dependent on financial institutions making you aware of possible fraud occurring, or is awareness a two-way street? So I think the questions are around, how is that cooperation going? Are we kind of helping each other? But also Glenn's question is, do the private sector need more incentives, I think, to be cooperating with the public sector on this? Laura, I'm going to start with you first.
I mean, I think the regulation, let's say PSD establishes a lot of obligation on payment service providers on fraud, in the sense that the burden, let's say, of a fraudulent transaction goes on payment service providers. I think with intention, probably with intention, as the rationale says, of having this incentive to invest in fraud, in the sense of bearing the responsibility. There is a debate open how to balance this responsibility, because it is also not a good signal that then the payment that the user, because of the bank, for instance, bears all the responsibility, then that the user does not have any responsibility. So it's very important that there is a balance of responsibilities. Otherwise, me as a user could, let's say, make a misuse and just leave my credit card anywhere for a fraudster too. So I think there is a very big debate. So on the incentives, let's say that from the regulation, tends to go on some specific requirements to incentivize the industry to invest on this. But at the same time, there is this balance of liability to also make aware the customer, you need to do this, otherwise this will have to have consequences, like in life. If you don't take this seriously, consequences will apply. So what more of an incentive of, if you do not do this, you're going to bear the consequences. Now the question is how we balance this liability. So I think from the regulation side, the incentive is you are going to bear the consequences of this fraudulent transaction. Now, as we mentioned, the debate is there. That's what I can say from a regulation side, where it stands, the debate on the liability regime on fraudulent transactions.
Thanks, Laura. Marcus, I'm coming to your thoughts. So how well is that cooperation going? And I'm going to add in, because we've just had a question from Joan, which I think fits with this nicely. Are some of the anti-fraud regulations making it more difficult for average consumers to conduct legitimate businesses, like legitimate business? And if so, are they going to find creative ways around these regulations? So we can take both of those together.
Yeah, let me first start with the question and also try to kill another question, which is on the AMLA, the European Authority, because I think you incentivize institutions, financial institutions and others to cooperate by having a tough supervisor. Why do we get these AMLA? It's because we had a very easygoing supervision in Europe, which led to some financial institutions losing their reputation, getting cut off of the US dollar and getting insolvent. So what we really need is a supervisor that is well-resourced, that has the most modern IT tools, and that is what we try to build up with AMLA. If we have a stricter, tougher supervisor, we will have a more sound financial industry. On the question of cooperation, I already tried in my introduction to say what we need is indeed public-private partnership, and that is a two-way road, definitely. We need the government, the law enforcement agencies to give feedback to the private sector so that they know what they have to look at, what they have to search for. And on the other hand, the law enforcement agencies are, of course, dependent on the private sector because that's where the money flows. And we do see excellent cooperation forms, and I start with your country. Gimlet in Great Britain is a wonderful model for how effective these cooperation works. In Germany, we took this as a model and founded what we call AFCA, Anti-Financial Crime Alliance, which has been working now for 4 years. And we see now that this is growing and coming up in other countries as well. So very, very important, but it's a two-way road.
Thanks, Marcus. Just in case the audience aren't reading the question, I don't know if they're all looking at the question, but AMLA is the EU's, it's the Anti-Money Laundering Authority. And the question came in about whether the EU was moving quickly enough on getting this established, this new authority. So Colin, your thoughts on how well the cooperation is going? Obviously, your private sector, you're working with the public sector, but how well is that cooperation going more broadly? And also, I am interested in Joan's question about are people finding ways
I'll come back to Joan's question in a second. I mean, I think there is some cooperation in the UK between the public and the private sector. You know, you see the suspicious activity reports and those kind of things. I think there needs to be more feedback to the private sector. I think it can often go into a black hole and not be dealt with, or you know, there's no kind of closing the loop, if you like. From an analytics perspective, that's so important that you know what's working and what's not working, because you can make it better and you can give better results. And I think there's a gap potentially there. I think Joan's question, thank you. I don't think there is an average consumer. I think the average consumer is probably okay. I think it's the vulnerable end. You know, we've seen some examples of, you know, people like my mother being asked for a, you know, two-factor authentication code on her phone. She's got no idea what that is. She hardly ever uses a mobile phone. She doesn't use the internet. Equally, we've seen examples where, you know, blind users in shops are being asked for a PIN number on a machine, and you know they can't do it. You know, so I think an average consumer is probably okay. I think we need to look at the exceptions and the people at the ends of society in vulnerability and so on. They're the ones that struggle, and I think we need to come up with better solutions for those people, just because it's the right thing to do. Yep.
Thanks.
If you allow, I would like to come in on this as well, because this is actually really a very important question from Joan Blackwood, because it's a big problem in worldwide, what we call de-risking, right? That banks, of course, build up a lot of bureaucracy because they want to be compliant and then disturb the business of average consumers, or at least high-risk consumers. And it's a very difficult issue how we can solve this. We see a lot of issues, for example, with NGOs who try to transfer money into vulnerable areas, which are also high-risk areas because there are also terrorists in the regions, right? If you want to do human aid in, for example, now in the Middle East, very, very difficult. So what we can do here, and what we always try to explain is everything starts with a granular risk assessment that you have to do. You don't have to put up high levels of compliance if there's only a low risk. I think that is in line with what Colin said. If you have an average consumer, then it's usually a very low risk, and you don't have to put all the compliance bureaucracy on this consumer. While when it is a high risk client, then of course you need to apply more sophisticated due diligence.
And some of this, again, will come back to what Laura was saying, I think, about the need to educate people so that they're aware of these different risks as well, isn't it? Laura, I want to ask you Ian's question that's come in now, because this is a FinTech webinar. So we coming back to the kind of tech side of things. So Ian has said bribery and corruption are big types of fraud. So obviously we're covering all types of fraud today. And we've mentioned blockchain as one type of technology, but Ian has asked what other types of technology can help tackle this. Marcus, I know you were mentioning some types that you were in your kind of opening presentation, but Laura, are there particular types of technology that you're using in Spain at the moment to help tackle fraud?
I mean, I think blockchain is the main one that we are aware of, but I'm not particularly expert on the specific types of technology that is used in the private sector. So we could additionally send any written comments on this. But what I know of is blockchain is the one that's more in the list to help a public sector. I cannot think of any now, but we can revert in written.
Okay, thanks, Laura.
If I could just come in there, Siobhan.
Yeah, sure, Colin.
I mean, we did some work with the Association of Counter Fraud Examiners to understand what technologies organizations were using. And it varied from things like biometrics to help reduce fraud. So, you know, when you now apply for a passport, you provide a photograph and all those kind of things, and it has to be moving and digital fingerprints. But equally, analytics can help you, to Marcus's point, de-risk things. You know, if it's a low risk, then you can use analytics to identify, well, that's a low risk and a very low probability of fraud, whereas these combination of factors are more likely to be highly fraudulent and indicative of unusual patterns of behavior. So anomaly detection and those kind of things. You know, equally bringing in, if people are doing things online, there's a number of technologies that can, you know, use clever capabilities about how quickly you're typing. So if somebody's just copying and pasting passwords into a form, again, you can pick that up versus somebody deliberately typing in the password and so on. Yep. So there's a number of technologies you can use to identify and de-risk some of those applications, for example. For things like bribery and corruption, statistical analysis, so traditional statistical analytical techniques can identify where there seems to be some level of collusion. So the pricing of contracts, for example, may be closer than you would expect because they're using cover pricing and other techniques to bid that, to get their bid through. And we've seen that in the construction industry, again in the UK, going back 10 years or so, where a number of companies were fined for those kind of fraud. So, you know, analytics can certainly do it, and it can do it without being as intrusive, let's say, as some of the other techniques like, you know, fingerprinting and biometrics and so on. So I think there's an opportunity there.
Thanks, Colin. Marcus.
If you allow, I would like to give an interesting example, which we currently discuss in the European Union, and that is how do we identify customers when we onboard them into a bank, right? When I studied in Britain in the late 90s, I went to some Scottish bank with my German passport, right? And you go into the bank, you show your passport. But does the Scottish bank serviceman, does he really know how a German passport looks like? Very easy to commit fraud and to unveil or to hide your real identity. So here technology is great because it helps us. The technology knows exactly how an Azerbaijan passport, how a Chinese passport looks like. So these virtual identification tools are wonderful tools. But what we discuss currently in Europe is that there are two kinds of identification, which one is a photo ID. So is it really sufficient to send a photo and then onboard as a client? Or do you need video identification where you have movements, you talk to either a real person or to an artificial person, and then you can really find out whether this is a real person or not. And what we now try is to get a really ambitious level in Europe, which really makes sure that we identify correctly the customers.
Thanks. Ian has followed up with, does the decline in branch banking put greater pressure on online know your customer? So as you're saying, I guess those types of video technologies might be being used increasingly when people aren't going in face to face. that comes back to the question, because I absolutely hate doing those video. It comes back to, is it making it very difficult for the average user? I consider myself very much to be an average user.
I think you've also seen, though, even with some of those know your customers video calls, fraudsters will often be controlling that process. So you have to watch out that, yes, you think you're speaking to Colin Gray, but actually there's a fraudster saying, I'm just going to set up a video call with you now. Just be aware that this will be now done, and you're party to that fraud now. So again, it doesn't close everything off. So even those biometrics things can still be intercepted by fraudsters, and they can prime you to expect a number over your phone or a video call or whatever it happens to be. So just bear that in mind, I suppose. When we're
coming right back to the fact that fraudsters will take whatever the latest technology is and find a way of using it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I can't believe how fast the time has gone. This is probably going to be the final question to all of you. And I want to come back because it's been such a big theme that's come out, I think. The importance in all of this in terms of detection on sharing data, whether that's across government organizations or across sectors or within private sector companies as well. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that tension between sharing data and data privacy, and your thoughts on how do we get past this. Do you think there's a problem at the moment in that our data privacy laws are too rigid, or do you think it's more a cultural issue in that officials and others don't know where they can share data? So is this kind of something that needs to change, or is it an education issue? Laura, I'll start with you on this one.
I mean, I think it is a big. I think it has both components. So it is an educational issue for sure, in the sense that we share a limited data with. We do not know who the recipient of that data is. So sometimes we lose the information on who's the interlocutor in this information. But at the same time, I do tend to think that the data protection regulation may be too strict, in the sense that we need to balance objectives, like in all regulations. We need to balance the objective of security, of course, and data privacy. If we do not share additional information, it's impossible to go at the same speed as fraud. It's just not possible. And as we mentioned, this is one of the key elements in order to prevent fraud. So I think it has both elements on this side. And I wanted also to conclude on one that you mentioned about the difficulty of some mechanisms for fraud. And I think one important element that we all know is the strong customer authentication. I think it's in all the debates. And as you know, this has definitely mitigated a lot of fraud. So strong customer authentication is how we use it. But at the same time, it is extremely difficult to use. So in Spain, we have the experience that not disabled people are not able to use it, but the elderly. An example of our elderly cannot use a strong customer authentication. So what does this mean in practice? That they are actually out of being secured. So this is not. So how do we manage this customer convenience and at the same time security? So strong customer authentication is extremely difficult to use, and there's a very big debate on how to include inclusion. So with the new proposal of the Commission, there's a lot of inclusion elements put here forward to balance these objectives of security and at the same time inclusion. So I think that was an important element also to add to the discussion.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, that issue around the elderly and others kind of being digitally excluded obviously now stretches to, are they also being kept secure if they can't kind of work some of these new protections? Yeah. Thanks, Laura. Colin, your thoughts, your final thoughts.
Yeah, I think there's so yes, there should be more sharing and those kind of things. I think there's another capability as well. So we'll all have seen generative AI in the press recently, ChatGPT and those kind of things. But generative AI can also generate data that looks very much like real data. So, but it's not. And you can use it to train models to at least take you 90% of the way there without having to share everything. You can build out a good part of the journey, if you like, to generate those algorithms that are needed to detect fraud. And then that last 10%, yes, you might have to use some real data to finalize and finesse the models and capabilities that we're talking about. So I think I don't think we need to necessarily give up privacy completely. I think there's some approaches that can be used to minimize the amount of privacy at risk. But then at some point, yes, there will be a need to build out models and processes and algorithms and so on that then take it that last mile, which is connecting Colin Gray to other Colin Grays that sound similar.
Thanks, Colin. And then Marcus, finally, you did mention, I think in your opening comments, some ways in which that tension can be addressed, like the data custodians and encryption technology. But do you think the balance is too much one way or another at the moment?
Well, there is certainly a cultural issue here. We are all working in Europe under the GDPR, but we see that data can be shared much more easily in Italy than, for example, in Germany. So there is a cultural issue. But there is also an issue of legal uncertainty. The people who have to process the data, they on the one hand have the obligation to effectively fight crime. On the other side, they have to fulfill the data protection, and they're not sure under what conditions they can share what data. And this must be clearly spelled out by the regulator. And this is what we currently do with the AML package in Europe, which will provide a new legal rule under which data can be shared. So this is a huge progress. And as you said, I think we have a lot of technologies that can help us here in kind of reconciling both. You can keep up a high level of data protection. At the same time, you can share the data with a data custodian, with a migrating algorithm, or with encryption technology. So I think technology is key here.
Marcus, thank you so much. What a fantastic line to end on. Technology is key here. I think that's kind of summed up everything we're saying. But thank you so much for it. A fascinating discussion. I mean, I've certainly taken away the fact that this is so important that the public sector can keep pace with this, because there is so much at stake. And then that role of technology, using of data analytics, analysing all the data that we have to enable us to do that. But also, I think so much more to come. It's clear that still, especially at the EU level, there's still a lot more going on and a lot more to come. Thank you so much to our fantastic panel, to Colin, to Marcus, and to Laura for giving us so much of your time and your expertise. Thanks to the audience as well for sending in so many great questions. Really good to have that engagement today. Thank you to SAS for being our knowledge partner today. And just to let you know, to everybody who watched today and all of those who registered and couldn't join live, the link will be available on the website, and we will send that round to everybody who registered. So you'll be able to watch the video again and to share it with any of your colleagues as well. And there will also be an article written with the kind of key issues that came out of the conversation today, and that will be shared with everybody in a week or so's time. So that just leaves me to say thank you so much for joining us. Thanks again to the great panel. Enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are, and I hope to see you on another one of our webinars very soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you very much. Bye.